The alarm clock buzzed at 5:15 a.m., but Lieutenant Sophia Chen was already awake. At 32, she had long stopped needing artificial wake-up calls. Her body clock ran with military precision, a habit forged through 15 years of service that refused to fade even 2 years into her training role at Blackwater Mountain Tactical Academy. Sophia rolled out of her narrow bed in the instructor's quarters, her movements silent and efficient. The explosion in Syria had left her with scars that ran deeper than skin. But her hands, her small, delicate hands that had been the source of endless mockery throughout her career, remained steady as a surgeon's. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. By 5:45 a.m., she was at the equipment room, signing out the rifle that had become more companion than tool. The M24A3 looked weathered and unassuming, much like Sophia herself. The stock had been custom-modified to fit her grip, a necessity that had once been a source of shame. Now it was simply part of who she was, the sniper with the tiny hands who never missed. "Morning, old friend," Sophia whispered, running her slender fingers along the barrel. She'd fired over 1,800 rounds through this weapon in combat zones across 3 continents. Each shot had been meticulously calculated, each one meant to protect her unit and complete the mission. The trainees started arriving at 6:30 a.m. for morning qualifications, their voices carrying across the mountain air with the confidence of those who hadn't yet faced real combat. Sophia positioned herself at the instructor's station, methodically preparing her rifle with the reverence most people reserve for sacred objects. "Holy crap, would you look at that?" Private Jackson Reynolds snorted, pointing at Sophia's weapon. "Is that custom-made for a child? I think my kid's sister has bigger hands than that." His buddy Private Talia Brooks couldn't contain her laughter. "Seriously, Lieutenant, did they have to special order baby-sized equipment for you? How do you even pull the trigger with those doll hands?" More trainees gathered around, the morning air filling with barely concealed mockery. Specialist Derek Powell, fresh from selection with all the arrogance that came with it, stepped forward with a smirk that made Sophia's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Ma'am, with all due respect," Powell said, his voice dripping with false politeness. "Those hands look better suited for typing reports than handling a precision weapon. No wonder they've got you teaching instead of deployed." The laughter grew louder. Sophia's grip on her rifle remained steady, but something flickered behind her dark eyes. Not anger, but something deeper. Something that had been buried under years of quiet excellence and unspoken achievements. "Tell you what, Lieutenant," Powell continued, emboldened by his audience. "Why don't you let me show these recruits what a real operator looks like?" He hefted his brand new MK-22 MRAD, complete with state-of-the-art scope and pristine finish. "This baby can reach out and touch someone at 1,500 meters, no problem, especially with hands big enough to handle it properly." Sophia said nothing. She simply stood up, walked to the equipment table, and began setting up targets at various distances. Her movements were economical, practiced, like she'd done this exact routine thousands of times before. "Oh, she's actually going to try to shoot with those tiny hands," whispered Private Eliza Thompson, pulling out her phone to record. This should be good for a laugh. What none of them knew was that tucked away in Sophia's small quarters was a classified folder, its contents known to only a handful of people in the entire military. They didn't know about Operation Kingfisher, or the 3 high-value targets she'd eliminated in under 2 minutes while her team was pinned down in Raqqa. They didn't know about the custom modifications she'd pioneered for snipers with smaller frames, innovations that had saved lives and improved accuracy across special operations teams. They didn't know that the woman they were mocking had changed the way the military thought about the physical requirements for elite snipers, proving that precision and skill mattered more than hand size or brute strength. But Sophia wasn't thinking about achievements or recognition as she adjusted her scope with practiced precision. She was thinking about responsibility, about the young faces surrounding her, about the lessons they needed to learn before they faced the real world, where shots had consequences beyond hitting paper targets. The trainees continued their jokes, but Major David Harrison, the range supervisor, had grown quiet. Something about Sophia's demeanor, the way she handled her weapon, the absolute confidence in her movements, made him step closer to observe. Sophia loaded a single round into her rifle's chamber. The sound of the bolt sliding home cut through the morning chatter like a knife, and for just a moment, the laughter died. Target 8, she announced quietly, her voice carrying across the range despite its softness. 1,200 meters. The laughter resumed immediately. Target 8 was positioned at the far end of the range, barely visible even with binoculars in the early morning light. In the 2 years the range had been operational, only 3 shooters had ever managed to hit it, and all had needed multiple attempts. 1,200 meters? Powell scoffed. Lieutenant, I can barely see that target with my scope. You sure those tiny hands can handle the recoil from a shot like that? Sophia settled into her shooting position, and suddenly, her entire demeanor changed. The slight hint of resignation in her shoulders vanished. Her breathing became measured and controlled. Her eyes took on a focus that made Major Harrison take an involuntary step back. For just a moment, the unassuming instructor disappeared and something else took her place. Something that had survived firefights, eliminated threats, and carried the weight of impossible missions for 15 years. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sophia's finger found the trigger, and she began her final breathing sequence. What the trainees couldn't see was the complex calculation running through her mind. Wind speed, temperature, humidity, barometric pressure, even the slight vibration from a helicopter passing 2 miles away. This was what 15 years of combat experience looked like. Not flashy equipment or physical attributes, but knowledge earned in places where missing meant your teammates didn't come home. The range fell silent as Sophia took her final breath and squeezed the trigger. The crack of her rifle echoed across Blackwater Mountain like thunder, cutting through the morning air with deadly precision. For 3 full seconds, the only sound was the distant whistle of wind through the range markers. Then Specialist Powell's voice broke the silence, dripping with mockery. Well, that was impressive. Anyone see where that shot landed? Maybe she just scared the target into submission with those dainty fingers. The laughter erupted again, but this time Major Harrison held up his binoculars, scanning the distant targets. His expression slowly changed from casual interest to something approaching awe. Dead center, he announced quietly. The laughter died like someone had flipped a switch. What? Powell grabbed his own binoculars, adjusting the focus frantically. That's impossible. Nobody hits target 8 on the first. His words trailed off as he stared through the lenses. Sophia calmly ejected the spent cartridge, the brass casing catching the morning sunlight as it arced through the air. She didn't bother to check her shot through the scope. She already knew where it had landed. Private Brooks's hands shook as she lowered her own binoculars. Holy hell, she actually did it! But the real shock was just beginning. Major Harrison pulled out his tablet and began scrolling through personnel files, his brow furrowed in concentration. Sophia's name pulled up a basic instructor profile, but there was something else, classified attachments that required higher clearance to access. Lieutenant Chen, Harrison said carefully, I need to make a phone call. Sophia simply nodded and began packing up her rifle. The show was over, but she could feel the weight of 20 pairs of eyes following her every movement. The casual disrespect from moments before had evaporated, replaced by something between confusion and grudging respect. How did she do that? Whispered Private Reynolds to his buddy. That shot was impossible. Maybe she got lucky, Powell muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Sophia overheard and paused in her packing. For the first time that morning, she spoke directly to the trainees. Luck is what unprepared people call skill, she said quietly. Some of you might want to remember that. As she walked toward the equipment building, her movements graceful. Despite the weight of her gear bag, Sophia's mind drifted to places she tried not to visit. Syria, the explosion that had nearly ended her career but somehow left her hands steady enough to still shoot, the decisions that haunted her dreams, and the lives that had depended on her never missing. Behind her, the trainees were beginning to whisper among themselves. The mood had shifted, and Sophia could feel it like a change in barometric pressure before a storm. Private Mia Vasquez, who'd remained quiet during the morning's mockery, suddenly stepped forward. Wait, she called out. Lieutenant Chen? Sophia stopped but didn't turn around. My sister served in Syria with special operations. She used to tell me stories about a female sniper who saved her unit when they were pinned down by insurgents. Mia hesitated, said she had the smallest hands in the unit but could hit targets at impossible distances. They called her Ghost Hands. Said she never missed, not once in 3 years of deployment. The range had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stilled. "Is that you?" Mia asked. Sophia turned slowly, her dark eyes meeting the young soldier's gaze. For a moment, something flickered across her features. Pain, pride, regret, all tangled together in an expression that spoke of burdens too heavy for words. "Did your sister make it home?" she asked simply. "Yes, ma'am, she did." Sophia nodded once. "Then, that's all that matters." She continued walking, leaving behind a group of trainees who were beginning to understand that they'd been in the presence of something extraordinary. But Sophia carried a heavier burden than their newfound respect. As she locked her rifle in her personal storage locker, her hands briefly touched a small metal box hidden behind her cleaning supplies. Inside was a collection of items she'd never shown anyone, a silver star she'd refused to accept publicly, a commendation letter signed by a general whose name was still classified, and a photograph of 8 operators who'd made it home because of her skills. But there was also a list, written in her own careful handwriting, names of soldiers who hadn't made it home despite her best efforts. Shots she'd missed, or couldn't take, or arrived too late to matter. Sophia carried the weight of every trigger pull, every decision, every life that had hung in the balance of her marksmanship. The trainees saw one perfect shot and thought they understood who she was. They had no idea that perfection came with a price measured in sleepless nights and ghosts that whispered in the dark. Major Harrison finished his phone call and approached Sophia's locker area. His expression was grave, respectful in a way it hadn't been that morning. "Lieutenant," he said quietly, "I just spoke with Colonel Richards. She wants to see you in her office." Sophia didn't respond immediately. She'd been dreading this moment for 2 years. The moment when her past caught up with her carefully constructed, quiet life. "Am I in trouble, Major?" Harrison shook his head. "No, ma'am. I think they want to properly recognize what you've done, what you've achieved." Sophia's laugh was bitter and brief. "Recognition is for people who want to be remembered, Major. I just want to be left alone to do my job." But as she walked toward the administration building, Sophia knew her peaceful days of anonymity were coming to an end. The shot that was meant to quiet the mockery had instead awakened something she'd spent years trying to bury. Sometimes the hardest part of being exceptional isn't the achievements themselves. It's living with the aftermath, carrying the weight of other people's expectations, and trying to find peace in a world that wants to turn your worst moments into your greatest triumphs. Sophia had learned long ago that the most dangerous enemies weren't the ones shooting at you from a distance. They were the ones inside your own head whispering that you could have done more, been faster, been better. As she approached Colonel Richards' office, Sophia straightened her shoulders and prepared to face whatever came next. But she couldn't shake the feeling that her carefully constructed world was about to change forever. Colonel Janet Richards' office felt like a tribunal. Sophia sat rigidly in the chair across from her desk, her hands folded in her lap while Richards read through a thick file marked with security classifications she recognized but had hoped never to see again. "Lieutenant Sophia Chen," Richards said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of authority, or should I say, ghost hands. Sophia's jaw tightened. That call sign belonged to a different life, a different version of herself that she'd buried along with too many memories. "I go by Lieutenant Chen now, ma'am." Quote. Richards nodded, her gray eyes studying Sophia's face. "Says here you've been flying under the radar for 2 years. Requested transfer to training duty. Took a reduction in responsibilities. Your commanding officers in Syria recommended you for the Distinguished Service Cross, which you declined." "Yes, ma'am. Mind telling me why one of our most effective tactical snipers is content to teach basic marksmanship to trainees who don't even know what they're looking at?" Sophia's silence stretched long enough to become uncomfortable. Outside the window, she could see the firing range where her single shot had shattered her carefully maintained anonymity. She'd been a fool to think she could hide forever. "With respect, ma'am, my reasons are my own." Richards's expression hardened. "Not anymore, they're not. Word is already spreading about what happened at the range this morning. Major Harrison made some calls. And now I've got Joint Special Operations Command asking questions about why one of our most skilled snipers has been wasted on entry-level instruction. Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Ma'am, I specifically requested. I know what you requested, Richards cut her off. But here's the thing, Lieutenant. The military doesn't get to waste assets like you, not with the current threat landscape. We're shipping you back to active duty with the Special Operations Task Force. Effective immediately. The words hit Sophia like a physical blow. She'd spent 2 years building a life away from the scope, away from the calculations that meant life or death, away from the weight of taking lives to save lives. The thought of returning to that world made her hand shake for the first time in years. Ma'am, I'm not fit for active duty. The explosion that injured you but left your shooting hand intact. Richards's voice was matter-of-fact, brutal in its efficiency. Your physical evaluation shows you've made a full recovery. Your shooting this morning proves your skills are intact. You're being reassigned to Special Operations Task Force within the week. Sophia stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. No, ma'am, I won't do it. Richards's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? I said no, I'm refusing the assignment. The office fell silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. Richards's face flushed red, and when she spoke, her voice was dangerously quiet. Lieutenant, I don't think you understand. This isn't a request. This is a direct order from command. You don't get to refuse. Sophia straightened to her full height, her dark eyes meeting Richards's glare without flinching. Then I'm requesting immediate discharge from service. Denied. On what grounds? Richards smiled, but there was no warmth in it. On the grounds that you're too valuable to lose. Your contract has been extended under the Exceptional Skills Retention Program. Congratulations, Lieutenant. You're stuck with us for another 3 years. Sophia felt the walls closing in around her. She'd known this moment would come eventually, but she'd hoped for more time. Time to heal. Time to forget. Time to become someone other than the weapon the military had shaped her into. Ma'am, you can't force me to kill people. I'm not forcing you to do anything, Lieutenant. I'm simply ensuring that your skills are utilized where they're needed most. What you do with those skills is between you and your conscience. Sophia's hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a moment, Richard saw something flicker across her features, something that reminded her why snipers were often considered the most dangerous soldiers in any unit. You have no idea what you're asking me to do, Sophia said quietly. I know exactly what I'm asking. I'm asking you to serve your country, just like thousands of other soldiers do every day. Those soldiers don't carry what I carry. Richards leaned forward, her voice taking on a patronizing tone that made Sophia's skin crawl. Lieutenant, I've read your file. I know about the PTSD evaluation, the nightmares, the survivor's guilt. But here's the reality. You're a soldier first, and your personal issues come second to the needs of national security. Sophia felt something break inside her chest. 2 years of careful emotional control. 2 years of building walls between herself and the part of her that lived in crosshairs and calculated kill shots, suddenly crumbled. Personal issues? Her voice was barely above a whisper, but Richard suddenly looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, do you know how many people I've killed? Lieutenant, I don't think. 38 confirmed kills. 38 human beings who stopped breathing because I was good at my job. Do you know what that does to a person? Do you know what it's like to see their faces every time you close your eyes? Quote.
Richard's confident expression was beginning to crack. Lieutenant Chen, you need to calm down. And do you know what's worse than the ones I killed? The ones I couldn't save? The ones who died because I wasn't fast enough, wasn't good enough, wasn't in the right position at the right time. Sophia's voice was rising now, years of suppressed emotion pouring out like a broken dam. My spotter, Martinez, died because I couldn't get to him in time after the explosion. Bled out while I tried to stop the bleeding with these hands. These tiny hands that everyone mocks until they need someone to make an impossible shot. That's enough, Lieutenant. No, ma'am, it's not enough. You want to talk about utilizing my skills? My skills are built on a foundation of dead bodies and broken promises. Every shot I take carries the weight of every shot I've missed. Every life I save reminds me of the lives I couldn't save. Sophia was breathing hard now, her carefully maintained composure completely shattered. Richards reached for her phone, probably to call security, but Sophia's next words stopped her cold. You want to force me back into the field? Fine. But understand this. I won't be the same sniper I was before. The woman who could take those shots without hesitation died in that explosion in Syria. What you're getting is someone who sees ghosts in every scope and carries the weight of 38 souls on her conscience. The office fell silent. Richards's hand hovered over her phone, but something in Sophia's expression made her hesitate. You're right about one thing, ma'am, Sophia continued, her voice dropping back to its normal quiet tone. I am too valuable to waste. But not because of my shooting skills. I'm valuable because I know the cost of those skills. I know what it means to be turned into a weapon and then expected to live with the consequences. Sophia turned toward the door, then paused. I'll report for reassignment as ordered, ma'am. But I want you to remember this conversation when the reports start coming in about my performance. You're not getting ghost hands back. You're getting someone who learned the hard way that there are some things more important than following orders. As Sophia left Richards's office, she carried with her the bitter taste of defeat, but also something else. A growing determination that if she was going to be forced back into the world she'd tried to escape, she wouldn't go quietly. Sometimes the most dangerous person in any conflict isn't the one with the best skills or the newest equipment. It's the one who has nothing left to lose. Sophia spent the next 3 days in a strange kind of limbo. Officially, she was still an instructor at Blackwater Mountain, but word of her impending reassignment had spread through the facility like wildfire. Trainees who had mocked her hands now watched her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty, while the other instructors gave her a wide berth, unsure how to treat someone who'd gone from colleague to legend overnight. But Sophia wasn't focused on the awkwardness around her. She was doing what snipers do best, observing, calculating, and preparing for the next shot. She spent her evenings in the base library, a cramped room filled with military manuals and outdated computer terminals. Most soldiers avoided the place, preferring to spend their free time at the recreation center or in town, but Sophia had always found solace in information, and right now information was her best weapon. She started with military regulations, particularly those governing personnel assignments and discharge procedures. What she found made her jaw clench with frustration. Richards had been right about the Exceptional Skills Retention Program. It was a little-known provision that allowed the military to extend contracts for personnel deemed critical to national security. But as Sophia dug deeper, she discovered something interesting. The program required specific documentation and approval processes that had to be followed to the letter. Any deviation from protocol could invalidate the extension. Burning the midnight oil again, Lieutenant? Sophia looked up to find Major Harrison standing in the library doorway, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. She'd been so absorbed in her research that she hadn't heard him approach. Just some light reading, Major? Harrison set 1 cup next to her and settled into the chair across from her. Mind if I ask what you're looking for? Sophia studied his face for a moment. Harrison had been decent to her over the past 2 years, neither particularly friendly nor hostile. But something in his expression suggested he had more on his mind than casual conversation. Legal precedents, she said carefully. Harrison nodded slowly. Thought so. Look, Lieutenant, I know what Richards is trying to do to you, and I don't like it. Sophia's eyebrows rose slightly. Oh? I've been in the service for 18 years. I've seen good soldiers burned out by commanders who see them as nothing but tools. What happened to you in Syria? What you went through? No one should be forced back into that situation against their will. Sophia felt a flicker of hope, but kept her expression neutral. Are you speaking officially, Major? Hell no. Officially, I'm just here to make sure one of my instructors isn't planning to go AWOL. Harrison leaned forward, lowering his voice. But unofficially, I might have some information that could help your situation. Sophia closed the regulation manual she'd been reading. I'm listening. Richards has been under pressure from above to show results. Her promotion to full colonel got delayed last year because of some issues with training efficiency ratings. Word is she's looking for high-profile wins to boost her record, and you're her ticket to advancement. Exactly. But here's the thing. Richards cut some corners when she processed your retention paperwork. She was so eager to get approval that she skipped a few steps. Sophia felt her pulse quicken. What kind of steps? Harrison glanced around the empty library, then pulled a folder from inside his jacket. The kind that require a psychological evaluation before reassignment to active duty, especially for personnel who've been in non-combat roles for extended periods. Sophia opened the folder and scanned its contents. Her heart began to race as she read the regulation Harrison had highlighted. Any service member reassigned to active combat duty following a period of non-combat service exceeding 18 months must undergo comprehensive psychological evaluation by qualified military mental health personnel, she read aloud. Richards ordered your reassignment without the evaluation, Harrison said quietly. Technically, that makes the whole thing invalid. Sophia looked up from the papers. Why are you helping me? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup. I had a younger brother. Army Ranger deployed to Afghanistan in 2011. He was a good kid, wanted to serve his country, do the right thing. But he saw too much over there, went through too much. When he came home, he wasn't the same. What happened to him? He tried to get help, tried to talk to someone about what he was going through. But his commanding officer said the Rangers didn't need weak soldiers, that he just needed to tough it out. Forced him back into deployment rotation. Harrison's voice grew heavy. He killed himself 3 weeks before he was supposed to ship out. Left a note saying he couldn't carry the weight anymore. Sophia felt a familiar ache in her chest. She'd known too many soldiers who'd lost their battles with invisible wounds. I'm sorry, Major. The point is, I won't stand by and watch another good soldier get destroyed by commanders who see people as nothing but numbers on a report. Harrison met her eyes. You've got grounds for appeal, Lieutenant. The question is whether you're willing to fight. Sophia stared at the regulation documents, her mind racing through possibilities. Fighting Richards would mean going up against the system that had shaped her entire adult life. It would mean exposing herself to scrutiny, reliving trauma she'd spent years trying to bury. But it would also mean taking control of her own life for the first time in 15 years. What would I need to do? Harrison smiled grimly. File a formal complaint with the Inspector General's office. Cite the regulation violations. Request a mandatory psychological evaluation and demand a review of your reassignment. And if Richards retaliates? That's where it gets interesting. Any attempt to punish you for filing a legitimate complaint would be grounds for additional charges against her. Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the desperate kind that came from wishing things were different, but the solid, tactical kind that came from having a plan. There's one more thing, Harrison said, pulling out his phone. That shot you made at the range, I recorded it. Video documentation of your current skill level might be useful if anyone questions your fitness for duty. Sophia watched the video on Harrison's phone, herself, calm and controlled, taking an impossible shot and making it look routine. But what struck her wasn't her own performance. It was the faces of the young trainees in the background, their expressions changing from mockery to awe in the space of a heartbeat.
They look at you like you're some kind of superhero, Harrison observed. I'm not. Maybe not, but you're something those kids needed to see. Proof that skill and experience matter more than physical attributes and loud voices. Sophia handed the phone back, but her mind was still processing what she'd seen. Those trainees would remember that moment for the rest of their careers. Not just the shot itself, but the lesson that came with it. That quiet competence often trumped flashy displays. Major, if I do this, if I fight back, I need to know you'll back me up. Harrison nodded without hesitation. All the way, Lieutenant. Some things are worth fighting for. As Sophia walked back to her quarters that night, she carried with her more than just regulation documents and legal precedents. She carried the knowledge that she wasn't as alone as she'd thought, and that sometimes the most important battles were the ones fought not with rifles and scopes, but with paperwork and persistence. Richards thought she held all the cards, but Sophia had learned something valuable during her years in the field. The most dangerous enemy was often the one who appeared to be cornered. Tomorrow she would begin the fight for her freedom. Not with the skills that had made her a legend, but with the one weapon Richards hadn't counted on, her refusal to go quietly. Sophia stood outside the Inspector General's office at 08 00 hours sharp, a thick manila folder clutched in her hands. Inside were copies of regulation violations, timeline discrepancies, and a formal complaint that had taken her 3 sleepless nights to perfect. She'd written it like a sniper plans a shot, methodically, precisely, with no room for error. The IG's office was located in the base's administrative complex, a sterile building that smelled of floor wax and bureaucracy. Sophia had avoided this place for 2 years, preferring the honest smell of gun oil and fresh air at the training ranges. But today, this was her battlefield. Lieutenant Chen, Commander Walsh will see you now. Commander Sarah Walsh was exactly what Sophia had expected. Crisp uniform, sharp eyes, and an expression that suggested she'd heard every sob story and excuse in the military handbook. Her office was spartanly decorated, with only a few commendations on the wall and a photo of her with various high-ranking officials. "Have a seat, Lieutenant. I understand you have a complaint to file." Sophia placed her folder on Walsh's desk and sat at attention. "Yes, ma'am. I'm filing a formal complaint regarding procedural violations in my recent reassignment orders." Walsh opened the folder and began reading, her expression neutral. Sophia had organized everything chronologically, with tabs marking each regulation violation and supporting documentation. She learned long ago that presentation mattered as much as content when dealing with military bureaucracy. "This is quite thorough," Walsh said after several minutes. "You're alleging that Colonel Richards violated military regulations regarding psychological evaluations for combat reassignment." "Yes, ma'am. Specifically, Arkansas 614-200, Section 5-12, which requires comprehensive mental health screening for any service member returning to active combat duty after 18 months in non-combat roles." Walsh made notes as Sophia spoke. "And you're requesting this evaluation be completed before any reassignment takes effect." "Correct, ma'am. I'm also requesting a review of the Exceptional Skills Retention Program application in my case, as it appears to have been expedited without proper documentation." What Sophia didn't say was that she'd spent the previous evening on a secure military database, cross-referencing Richards's previous personnel decisions. What she'd found was a pattern of cutting corners and bypassing regulations when it served her purposes. She'd documented everything but was holding it in reserve. Walsh leaned back in her chair. "Lieutenant, I have to ask, are you psychologically fit for duty? Because, from where I sit, this looks like someone trying to avoid a legitimate assignment." Sophia had expected this question. "Ma'am, that's exactly what the mandatory evaluation is designed to determine. I'm not claiming to be unfit. I'm claiming that proper procedures weren't followed to make that determination." "Fair enough." Walsh closed the folder. "I'll need to investigate these allegations. In the meantime, your reassignment is suspended pending review." Sophia felt a surge of relief but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet, Lieutenant. If this investigation finds that your complaints are frivolous or made in bad faith, you could be facing charges for insubordination and making false statements." "I understand, ma'am." As Sophia left Walsh's office, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. The first shot had been fired, and it had hit its target, but she knew Richards wouldn't take this lying down. She was right. By 1,400 hours, Sophia had been summoned back to Richards's office. This time, the colonel wasn't alone. A stern-faced Captain Sophia didn't recognize sat in the corner taking notes. "Lieutenant Chen?" Richards's voice was ice-cold. "I understand you've been making some serious allegations about my command decisions." "Ma'am, I filed a complaint about procedural violations. The allegations are documented in the official complaint." Richards's face flushed red. "You want to play games with regulations, Lieutenant? Fine. Effective immediately, you're confined to base pending investigation. No leave, no off-base privileges, no contact with outside parties except through official channels." Sophia had expected retaliation, but the severity caught her off guard. "Ma'am, on what grounds?" "Security risk. We can't have someone with your clearance level running around making accusations while under investigation." The captain in the corner spoke up. "Ma'am, is that really necessary? Lieutenant Chen hasn't been charged with anything." Richards shot him a withering look. "Captain Morgan, I don't recall asking for your opinion." Sophia realized she was witnessing something important. Not everyone in Richards's chain of command was comfortable with her tactics. She filed that information away for later use. "Ma'am," Sophia said carefully, "I believe confining me to base without charges could be seen as retaliation for filing a legitimate complaint." Richards's smile was predatory. "Prove it, Lieutenant." As Sophia left Richards's office, she understood that the real battle was just beginning. Richards was gambling that she could make Sophia's life miserable enough to force her to withdraw her complaint. What she didn't understand was that Sophia had survived far worse than administrative harassment. That evening, Sophia found Major Harrison waiting by her quarters. "I heard about Richards's retaliation," he said quietly. "Are you okay?" "I'm confined to base, but otherwise fine." Sophia glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. How did word get out so fast? Base gossip travels faster than radio waves, but there's something else you should know. You're not as alone as Richards thinks. Harrison handed her a piece of paper with several names written on it. These are instructors and officers who've had their own run-ins with Richards's methods. They're willing to provide statements if needed. Sophia looked at the list and felt a surge of hope. Among the names were people she respected, including Master Sergeant Elena Diaz, a decorated combat veteran who'd been passed over for promotion twice under Richards's command. Why are they willing to help? Because Richards has been playing fast and loose with regulations for months, and people are tired of it. Your complaint might be the catalyst that brings her whole house of cards down. That night, Sophia sat in her small quarters, planning her next moves. Richards had made a critical error by retaliating so quickly and obviously. She'd given Sophia more ammunition for her case and possibly shown her hand to people who might have remained neutral. Sophia pulled out a notepad and began writing, not a military report this time, but something more personal, a letter to the young trainees she'd been teaching. She wanted them to understand that standing up to authority wasn't about being rebellious or difficult. It was about having the courage to do what was right, even when it was hard. She thought about Specialist Powell and the other soldiers who'd mocked her hands, and how their expressions had changed after that single shot. They'd learned that day that appearances could be deceiving, that skill and experience mattered more than physical attributes. Now she was teaching them another lesson, that sometimes the most important battles weren't fought on distant battlefields but right here at home, against systems and people who abused their power. Sophia finished her letter and sealed it in an envelope. Tomorrow she would ask Harrison to deliver it to her former students. Tonight, she would prepare for the fight of her life. As she lay in her narrow bunk, Sophia realized something that surprised her. For the first time in 2 years, she felt like herself again. Not the broken woman who'd crawled away from that explosion in Syria, not the instructor hiding from her past, but the soldier who'd learned to take impossible shots under impossible conditions. Richards had made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that forcing Sophia into a corner would make her surrender. She'd forgotten that cornered snipers were the most dangerous kind. 3 days into her base confinement, Sophia received an unexpected visitor. Master Sergeant Elena Diaz knocked on her door at 0630, carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the grim expression of a woman with bad news. "Morning, Lieutenant. Mind if I come in?" Sophia's quarters were barely large enough for one person, let alone 2, but Diaz squeezed inside and closed the door behind her. "I've got news from the IG investigation," she said without preamble. "Walsh has been thorough, and what she's finding isn't pretty." Sophia accepted the coffee gratefully. She'd been living on base food and vending machine snacks since Richards had restricted her movements. How bad is it for Richards? Career-ending bad. Walsh found at least 7 other cases where she bypassed regulations for personnel decisions. Turns out your situation wasn't an isolated incident. Sophia felt a grim satisfaction, but Diaz's expression suggested there was more to the story. What's the catch? Richards knows she's finished. Walsh's recommendation is going to include a formal investigation by Military Criminal Investigation Division. We're talking court-martial territory. Sophia's coffee suddenly tasted bitter. And desperate people do desperate things. Word is Richards is planning to escalate before Walsh can finish her report. Diaz leaned forward, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. She's called in favors from her old unit. There's going to be an incident during your psychological evaluation tomorrow. Something that will make you look unstable, violent, unfit for duty. Sophia's blood ran cold. She'd seen this kind of setup before. Manufactured situations designed to justify predetermined conclusions. What kind of incident? The kind where you allegedly assault a medical officer during evaluation. The kind where you're sedated for your own safety and wake up with a medical discharge for psychological unfitness. Sophia stared into her coffee cup, her mind racing through possibilities. Richards was gambling everything on one last play, betting that she could destroy Sophia's credibility before she could destroy her career. How do you know this? Diaz smiled grimly. Because the medical officer she approached used to serve under me in Iraq, Captain Michael Torres. He came to me because he didn't like what Richards was asking him to do. Sophia looked up sharply. He's willing to help? More than willing. He's furious. Torres is one of the most ethical officers I know, and Richards essentially asked him to falsify medical records. He's prepared to testify about her approach if needed. Sophia felt pieces clicking into place in her mind, like adjusting a scope until the target came into perfect focus. What does he need from me? Your cooperation in documenting the setup. Torres is going to wear a recording device during your evaluation tomorrow. If Richards or anyone else tries to manufacture an incident, we'll have proof. Sophia nodded slowly. This was risky. If they were caught recording without authorization, they could all face charges. But it was also the kind of calculated risk that had kept her alive in Syria. There's something else, Diaz continued. Walsh's investigation turned up some interesting financial records. Apparently, Richards has been using the Exceptional Skills Retention Program to get bonuses for retaining critical personnel. Each time she successfully keeps someone from leaving, she gets a performance bonus. So this was never about my skills or national security. It was about her bank account and her promotion prospects. You were just another line item on her efficiency report. Sophia felt anger burning in her chest, but it was the cold, controlled anger of a professional. Richards had treated her like a commodity, an asset to be manipulated for her personal gain. She'd weaponized her trauma and her service record to advance her own career. What's the timeline? Torres will conduct your evaluation at 1,400 hours tomorrow. Walsh is scheduled to submit her preliminary findings to Division Command at 1,600 hours. We need to time this perfectly. Sophia stood up and walked to her small window, looking out at the training ranges where this whole situation had started. In the distance, she could see new trainees practicing their shooting stances, probably with the same arrogance and ignorance she'd once faced. Sergeant Diaz, I need you to do something for me. Name it. Contact Private Vasquez, the one whose sister served in Syria. Tell her I want to see her tonight. Diaz looked puzzled. May I ask why? Sophia turned from the window, and Diaz saw something in her expression that reminded her why she'd been called ghost hands in the field. Because tomorrow, when this is all over, I want those trainees to understand what really happened here. I want them to learn that the real enemy isn't always the one shooting at you from a distance. Sometimes it's the one sitting behind a desk, treating soldiers like pieces on a chessboard. That evening, Private Mia Vasquez arrived at Sophia's quarters looking nervous and confused. Sophia gestured for her to sit on the single chair while she remained standing. Your sister told you stories about Syria, Sophia began. Did she ever tell you about the hardest part of being a soldier? Vasquez shook her head. It's not the shooting or the danger, or even the fear. It's learning to tell the difference between orders worth following and orders that will destroy you. Your sister learned that lesson. Now I'm going to teach it to you. Sophia spent the next hour explaining everything. Richards's violations, the setup being planned for her evaluation, and the broader pattern of abuse that had been happening under their noses. Why are you telling me this? Vasquez asked when she finished. Because you and the other trainees need to understand that being a good soldier doesn't mean blindly following orders. It means having the courage to stand up when something's wrong, even when it's dangerous to do so. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. What happens to you tomorrow? Sophia smiled, and for the first time in days, it was genuine. Tomorrow, I remind Janet Richards that some people can't be intimidated, bought, or broken. And I teach her the same lesson I taught all of you at the firing range. Never underestimate someone because of how they look. because sometimes the smallest hands can make the biggest impact. As Vasquez left her quarters, Sophia felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began. Tomorrow would bring the final confrontation, but she was ready. She'd spent 15 years learning to take impossible shots under impossible conditions. Tomorrow she would take the most important shot of her life, not through a rifle scope, but through the careful application of truth, evidence, and the kind of moral courage that couldn't be faked or manufactured. Richards thought she was setting a trap for Sophia. She had no idea that she'd walked into one herself. Sophia arrived at the medical facility at 1,350 hours, 10 minutes early as was her habit. The building smelled of antiseptic and floor wax, sterile and impersonal. Captain Michael Torres met her in the waiting area, clipboard in hand, and a small recording device discreetly hidden under his lab coat. "Lieutenant Chen, I'm Captain Torres. Thank you for being punctual." Sophia nodded, noting the slight tension in Torres's voice. They were both walking into dangerous territory, but there was no turning back now. The evaluation room was small and windowless, containing only a desk, 2 chairs, and a medical examination table. Torres gestured for Sophia to sit while he reviewed his notes. "This is a standard psychological evaluation for combat readiness," Torres said, his voice carrying clearly for the recording device. "I'll be asking you some questions about your mental state, your experiences, and your feelings about returning to active duty." Sophia settled into her chair, hyper-aware of every sound and movement. Somewhere in this building, she knew Richards was waiting for her moment to spring whatever trap she'd planned. "Let's start with your time in Syria," Torres continued. "Can you tell me about your last combat deployment?" Sophia had rehearsed this part. Her answers needed to be honest but controlled, giving Torres material to work with while avoiding anything that could be twisted against her. "I served as a designated marksman with Special Operations Task Force from 2018 to 2021. My primary role was long-range reconnaissance and target elimination. And how did that deployment end? IED explosion during extraction. I sustained injuries that required extended medical leave." Torres made notes, nodding professionally. Sophia could see him checking the time discreetly. They were 15 minutes into the evaluation, and nothing unusual had happened yet. Then the door opened. Colonel Richards entered without knocking, accompanied by 2 MPs Sophia didn't recognize. Her expression was grim, official, the face of a woman doing her duty. "Captain Torres, I need to interrupt this evaluation." Torres looked up, his expression professionally neutral despite the recording device capturing every word. "Ma'am, we're in the middle of a psychological assessment. Is this urgent?" Quote, "I'm afraid it is. We've received intelligence suggesting that Lieutenant Chen may be experiencing a psychological episode. For everyone's safety, I'm ordering an immediate medical hold." Sophia felt her pulse spike but kept her voice steady. "Ma'am, on what grounds?" Richards pulled out a folder and handed it to Torres. Reports from multiple sources indicating erratic behavior, paranoid ideation, and potential for violence. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant, but you're going to need to be sedated and transferred to the psychiatric ward for observation." This was it, the manufactured crisis Diaz had warned her about. Sophia could see one of the MPs moving to block the door while the other approached her chair. "Colonel," Torres said carefully, "I'm not seeing any evidence of psychological distress in my evaluation so far. Perhaps we should complete the assessment before—" "Captain, that's an order." Richards cut him off. "Lieutenant Chen is to be restrained and sedated immediately." Sophia stood slowly, her hands visible and empty. Every instinct screamed at her to fight, to resist, to show them exactly what a trained killer looked like when cornered. But that was exactly what Richards wanted. Instead, she did something unexpected. She smiled. "Janet Richards," Sophia said quietly, "before your men lay hands on me, I think there's something you should know." Richards' confident expression flickered slightly. "Lieutenant, you're in no position to—" "I'm in no position to what? To defend myself against false charges? To expose your pattern of regulatory violations? To reveal your financial motivation for this entire situation?" The room went dead silent. Richards' face began to flush red. "You have no idea what you're talking about." Sophia's smile widened. "Don't I? Tell me, Colonel, how much bonus money have you received for personnel retention over the past 2 years?" And how many of those retentions involved bypassing mandatory procedures? Richards's hand moved toward her sidearm, and Sophia saw everything she needed to see in that gesture. She was trapped, desperate, and about to make the kind of mistake that would end her career permanently. "That's enough!" Richards shouted. "Lieutenant Chen is clearly experiencing a psychotic break. Restrain her immediately." But neither MP moved. They were looking between Richards and Sophia with growing confusion. Professional soldiers, smart enough to recognize that something wasn't right about this situation. Captain Torres stood up, his voice steady and authoritative. "Colonel Richards, I'm the medical officer in charge of this evaluation, and I'm not seeing any evidence of psychological distress requiring immediate intervention. Captain, I'm giving you a direct order. Ma'am, with respect, you don't have medical authority in this facility, and I'm documenting everything for my report." Richards's face went white as she realized what Torres was telling her. Every word, every illegal order, every attempt at manipulation was being recorded and would become part of the official record. Sophia stepped forward, her voice calm and conversational. "Colonel, I think you should know that Inspector General Walsh is expecting Captain Torres' evaluation report in approximately 30 minutes. I wonder what she'll think when she reads about your attempt to forcibly sedate a service member during a legitimate psychological assessment." Richard's world was collapsing around her, and Sophia could see her calculating her options. All of them led to the same place, the end of her career and possible criminal charges. "You planned this," she whispered. "No, ma'am, you planned this." "I just refuse to cooperate with your plan." The door opened again, and Commander Walsh entered with 2 officers from the Inspector General's office. Her expression was glacial as she surveyed the scene. "Colonel Richards, you're relieved of command, effective immediately. You'll be escorted to your quarters to await formal charges." Richards looked around the room like a trapped animal, seeing her carefully constructed world falling apart. "This is impossible. She's just one lieutenant." "How could one person?" "One person with the courage to stand up to corruption," Walsh cut her off, "and the intelligence to document everything properly." As the MPs escorted Richards from the room, Sophia felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years: complete, absolute victory. Not the kind that came from eliminating a target at long range, but the kind that came from standing up for what was right and seeing justice prevail. Captain Torres switched off his recording device and smiled. "Well, Lieutenant, I think we can conclude this evaluation. In my professional opinion, you're psychologically fit for duty. Whatever duty you choose to accept." Sophia nodded, feeling lighter than she had in years. "Thank you, Captain. For everything." Walsh approached Sophia, her expression respectful. "Lieutenant Chen, on behalf of the United States military, I apologize for what you've endured. Colonel Richards's actions were inexcusable, and justice will be served. What happens now? Now you get to decide your own future. Richards' retention order has been voided, along with all related documentation. You're free to choose your assignment, request discharge, or continue in your current role, whatever you prefer." Sophia looked around the room where she had just fought and won the most important battle of her military career. No rifle, no scope, no impossible distance shot, just courage, preparation, and the refusal to back down when cornered. "I'd like to return to my students, ma'am. I think they have more to learn." The next morning, news of Richards' relief from command spread through Blackwater Mountain like wildfire. Trainees and instructors alike buzzed with speculation about what had happened, but the official statement was brief. Colonel Richards had been removed for violations of military regulations and abuse of authority. Sophia walked across the training grounds toward the firing range, aware of the eyes following her. The story had spread quickly, growing with each telling. Some versions had her physically overpowering Richards. Others claimed she'd presented evidence of corruption so damning that Richards had been arrested on the spot. None of them were entirely accurate, but all of them captured something essential. That day, power had shifted from those who abused it to those who stood against abuse. As she approached the range, she saw her trainees already assembled, their faces a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Specialist Powell, who had led the mockery of her hands, stood slightly apart from the group, his expression unreadable. "Lieutenant," he said as she approached. "Permission to speak freely?" Sophia nodded. I owe you an apology. What I said about your hands, about your abilities, I was wrong. And not just because you made that impossible shot." He hesitated. I heard what happened with Colonel Richards. Standing up to her took more courage than any combat situation I've ever faced. Sophia studied him for a moment. Specialist Powell. "Do you know why I became a sniper?" He shook his head. "When I joined the military, everyone told me I couldn't do it. My hands were too small, my frame too slight. Every instructor, every commander looked at me and saw limitations." She held up her hands. "But I saw something different. I saw precision. I saw control. I saw the ability to do things that larger hands couldn't." She turned to address the entire group. "The military taught me how to shoot, but it also taught me something more important, that our greatest strengths often come from the very things others perceive as weaknesses. Your job as soldiers isn't to fit some predetermined mold. It's to discover what makes you different and turn it into your advantage." Private Vasquez stepped forward. "Ma'am, is it true that you recorded Colonel Richards trying to have you sedated?" Sophia smiled. "What's true is that when faced with injustice, I didn't just accept it. I prepared, I documented, and I stood my ground. The same skills that make a good sniper, patience, preparation, precision, also make for effective resistance against abuse of power." "But weren't you afraid?" another trainee asked. "She could have ended your career." "Of course I was afraid," Sophia admitted. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's action in the face of fear. When you believe in something strongly enough, the fear becomes secondary to doing what's right." She walked to the instructor's table and began setting up for the day's lesson. "Today we're going to work on something different. Not just marksmanship, but judgment. Knowing when to take the shot, and, more importantly, when not to." For the rest of the morning, Sophia led the trainees through a series of exercises designed to test not just their shooting skills but their decision-making abilities. She presented them with complex scenarios where the right answer wasn't always to pull the trigger. Sometimes it was to hold fire, to report information, or to find another solution. After the formal training was complete, Specialist Powell lingered behind. "Lieutenant, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Your hands. Did they ever actually limit you in combat?" Sophia considered the question. "They did, but not in the ways people expected. I couldn't handle certain weapons as effectively. Some equipment wasn't designed for someone with my grip size." She flexed her fingers. "But they also gave me advantages. I could access tight spaces others couldn't. I could manipulate small components with greater precision. And I learned to shoot differently. Not fighting the recoil with brute strength, but redirecting it, using physics instead of force." Powell nodded slowly. "So you didn't succeed despite your hands. You succeeded partly because of them." "Exactly. The military loves standardization, Specialist Powell. Same uniforms, same haircuts, same procedures. But combat isn't standardized. War isn't standardized. The enemy doesn't follow our rulebook. Sometimes the most valuable soldier is the one who doesn't fit the mold, the one who thinks differently, moves differently, solves problems differently." Powell looked down at his own hands. Large, powerful, but sometimes clumsy with fine adjustments. "I never thought about it that way." Few people do. We're conditioned to see differences as weaknesses. But the truth is, a team of identical soldiers with identical skills is vulnerable. Diversity of thought, of ability, of approach. That's what creates resilience. As Powell walked away, Major Harrison approached from the direction of the administration building. His expression was lighter than Sophia had seen in months. "Quite a performance yesterday, Lieutenant. The recording from Torres's evaluation is already becoming legendary at headquarters." "I didn't do it for the fame, Major." "I know." He handed her an envelope. "This came for you this morning, directly from General Crawford's office." Sophia took the envelope, her small hands handling it with characteristic precision. Inside was a formal letter on Department of Defense letterhead. "What is it?" Harrison asked. "An offer. They want me to develop a new training program for special operations snipers, specifically focused on non-traditional candidates. Smaller-framed personnel, women, anyone who doesn't fit the typical sniper profile. Are you going to take it?" Sophia looked out across the range, where her trainees were still practicing the lessons she'd taught them. "A month ago I would have said no. I wanted to stay hidden, to avoid anything that might reconnect me to that world. And now? Now I realize that hiding wasn't healing. It was just postponing. Maybe the best way forward isn't to run from who I was, but to use that experience to change things for the better." Harrison smiled. "For what it's worth, I think you'd be perfect for it. The military needs more leaders who understand that courage comes in all shapes and sizes." That evening, Sophia sat on her bunk, the general's letter in one hand and a small photograph in the other. The photo showed her team in Syria, 8 operators of different backgrounds, different builds, different specialties. 4 of them hadn't made it home. She traced her finger over their faces, remembering what each of them had taught her. Marco, with his encyclopedic knowledge of terrain features. Jamila, who could identify vehicle types by sound alone. Trevor, whose humor had kept them sane during the darkest missions. And Martinez, her spotter, who had believed in her when no one else did. "I think I found my next mission, guys," she whispered to the photograph. "Making sure what made each of you special isn't lost." She set the photo down and began to write her acceptance letter to General Crawford. As her small hands formed each precise letter, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced since before the explosion in Syria. The hands that had once been a source of mockery, then a source of deadly precision, would now become a symbol of something more important, the recognition that strength comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't the largest or the loudest, but the one wielded with the greatest conviction. Tomorrow she would begin building a new kind of program, one that would seek out those who had been overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed because they didn't fit the traditional mold. She would teach them what she had learned through years of struggle and triumph, that their perceived weaknesses could become their greatest strengths, that precision matters more than power, and that the most important muscle for any soldier isn't in their hands or arms, but in their mind and heart. As she signed her name at the bottom of the letter, Sophia felt something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Not just for herself, but for all the future soldiers, who would no longer have to fight twice as hard to prove themselves worthy because they didn't look the part. Sometimes the greatest victories weren't won on battlefields or firing ranges, but in changing the systems that determined who got to fight in the first place. 3 months later, Sophia stood before a group of 20 recruits at the newly established Non-Traditional Operators Training Center. They represented a cross-section of military personnel who had been told, in one way or another, that they didn't have what it took to become elite operators. Too short, too slight, hands too small, not enough upper body strength. But each had demonstrated exceptional aptitude in other areas: marksmanship, tactical thinking, problem-solving, spatial awareness. "Welcome to NTOTC," Sophia began. "You're here because someone, maybe everyone, told you that you couldn't do this job, that your body type, your size, or some other physical characteristic meant you weren't cut out for special operations." She looked at each face in turn, seeing in them the same determination she had carried for 15 years. They were wrong, and over the next 16 weeks you're going to prove it, not just to them, but to yourselves. She held up her hands. These hands have taken 38 confirmed kills at distances most conventional snipers would consider impossible, not because they're big or strong, but because they're precise, because I learned to use them exactly as they are, not as someone else thought they should be. She pointed to the training course behind her, a complex series of shooting positions, obstacles, and tactical challenges unlike any standard military course. This program isn't about making you fit the mold. It's about breaking the mold entirely. It's about recognizing that in modern combat scenarios, traditional physical metrics are increasingly irrelevant compared to other factors: decision-making speed, adaptability, precision, and psychological resilience. A young corporal raised his hand. "Ma'am, I've heard the regular special ops guys are calling this the Misfit Toys program. They don't think any of us will make it." Sophia smiled. "When I first qualified as a sniper, my commander called me a, quote, statistical anomaly. 2 years later, he was requesting me specifically for his most critical missions. Success is the most effective response to skepticism." She activated a large screen showing mission data from recent conflicts. The battlefield is changing. Urban environments, civilian populations, precision requirements, extended operations behind enemy lines. These scenarios don't always favor the traditional operator profile. They favor those who can adapt, who can blend in, who can do more with less. She pointed to a different screen showing specialized equipment, modified weapons, custom gear, adaptive technology. "We've also designed new tools and techniques specifically for your body types and physical attributes. You won't be fighting with equipment designed for someone else's body. You'll be using gear that leverages your unique capabilities." As the recruits dispersed to begin their initial assessments, Major Harrison approached from the observation area. "Quite a speech, Lieutenant. Or should I say Captain now?" Sophia touched the new rank insignia on her collar. The promotion had come with her new role, a recognition that what she was building here required additional authority. "Old habits die hard, Major. I still feel like that lieutenant with the tiny hands everyone laughed at." "Well, no one's laughing now." Harrison nodded toward a group of senior officers who had been observing the orientation from a distance. "Half of SOCOM wants to see what you're building here. Word is the initial data from your pilot program is changing minds at the highest levels. It's early days yet. The real test will come when these recruits deploy." "True, but you've already accomplished something remarkable. You've forced the military to question one of its most basic assumptions about who can be an operator." Sophia watched her recruits tackling their first challenges, each finding their own approach based on their unique physical attributes. "You know what's funny, Major? For years I tried to compensate for my hands, to prove I was just as good despite them. It took me too long to realize that in many situations I was better because of them. That's the lesson you're teaching here, isn't it? That difference isn't deficiency." "Exactly. In a world where warfare is increasingly about precision, adaptability, and specialized skills, we can't afford to exclude qualified candidates based on outdated physical metrics." As she walked among her recruits, offering guidance and adjustment, Sophia felt a sense of purpose stronger than anything she'd experienced in combat.
Her hands, the source of so much mockery and doubt, were now reshaping military doctrine itself, opening doors for hundreds of exceptional soldiers who might otherwise have been overlooked. The tiny hands they had mocked had become the hands that changed the system itself. And that, Sophia realized, was the most precise shot she had ever taken. 6 months into the non-traditional operators training program, Captain Sophia Chen stood at the observation platform overlooking the Gauntlet, the final qualification course she had personally designed. Unlike traditional special operations courses that emphasized brute strength and endurance, the Gauntlet was a sophisticated test of precision, adaptability, and tactical intelligence. Below her, Corporal Eliza Reyes, 5'2" with hands almost as small as Sophia's, was navigating the course with remarkable efficiency. Where traditional operators might have used strength to overcome obstacles, Reyes used leverage and momentum, conserving energy and maintaining accuracy even under extreme stress. "Impressive," said General Crawford, who had flown in specifically to observe the first class's final qualification. "She's outperforming standard metrics by nearly 20%. Sophia nodded, allowing herself a moment of pride. Corporal Reyes was rejected from Ranger School twice because of her size. Their loss is our gain. And that one? Crawford pointed to Sergeant James Kim, whose slight build and unusually long, thin fingers had made him an object of ridicule in traditional special operations training. "Watch his shooting sequence," Sophia said as Kim entered the sniper position of the course. Kim settled behind a modified rifle that leveraged his unique hand structure. What followed was a display of marksmanship so precise that even Crawford, a former sniper himself, let out a low whistle of appreciation. 8 shots, 8 critical hits, under 17 seconds, Sophia noted. His finger length gives him a trigger control advantage that traditional operators can't match. "And in close quarters?" Crawford asked, the skepticism still evident in his voice. "That's where it gets interesting." Sophia directed his attention to the next segment of the course, where Kim entered a complex urban environment simulation. Rather than relying on the brute force approach taught in conventional training, Kim moved with a fluid efficiency, using his smaller frame to access tight spaces and unconventional angles. He cleared the structure in record time, neutralizing every target without exposing himself to counterfire. Traditional operators are trained to dominate space, Sophia explained. We train our people to manipulate space, to use architecture, angles, and positioning to create advantages that don't depend on physical size. Crawford made notes on his tablet, his expression thoughtful. Initial deployment data supports your approach. The 4 graduates you sent to the Syrian extraction mission last month performed exceptionally well, especially in the urban phase. They succeeded because they were the right operators for that specific mission profile, not despite their physical characteristics, Sophia emphasized. That's the paradigm shift we're working toward. Mission-specific operator selection, rather than one-size-fits-all physical requirements. As they watched the remaining candidates complete the gauntlet, Crawford's comm unit buzzed. He stepped away to take the call, returning moments later with a gravity to his expression that immediately put Sophia on alert. "We have a situation," he said quietly. "Hostage scenario in Ankara. Turkish diplomat's family. High-value intelligence asset among them." Sophia nodded, understanding the delicacy of such a mission. "Special Activities Division?" "Already on site, but they're requesting a precision specialist. The extraction window is extremely narrow, and the physical parameters are challenging." Crawford met her eyes directly. "The access point is a ventilation shaft, 18 inches diameter." The implication was clear. None of the traditional operators could fit through such a narrow entry point. "How soon?" Sophia asked, her mind already shifting from instructor to operator. "Wheels up in 90 minutes. Sophia looked back at her trainees, still demonstrating the techniques and approaches she had developed. For 2 years, she had remained behind the lines, channeling her expertise into training others. She had built this program to prove that operators like herself belonged in special operations. Now came the ultimate test, not just of her program, but of her own resolve. "I'll need a briefing package and equipment clearance," she said, decision made. Crawford nodded. "Already being prepared." He hesitated. "You don't have to take this personally, Captain. We could send Reyes or Kim." "They're still completing qualification," Sophia replied. "And with respect, sir, this mission is exactly why I built this program. If I don't trust myself to execute the very operations I'm training others for, what message does that send?" As she walked toward the preparation area, Sophia felt a familiar tension building in her chest, the pre-mission focus she hadn't experienced in years. The ghosts she tried to leave behind in Syria stirred in her memory, but something was different now. They weren't accusatory specters, but silent witnesses to how far she had come. In the equipment room, she found Major Harrison already preparing her gear. "Word travels fast," she observed. "Only when it's important." He handed her a custom rifle case. "I had this waiting since the program started, just in case." Inside was her old M24A3, now upgraded with cutting-edge technology, but still fitted to her exact specifications. The grip still bore the subtle indentations from years of use, a perfect mold of her small hands. "You knew this day would come," she said, not a question but a realization. Harrison's expression was solemn. "You can't rewrite the rules without eventually proving why they needed rewriting in the first place." As she began her pre-mission routine, checking equipment with methodical precision, Harrison watched with quiet admiration. "The trainees are asking about you," he said. "Word's spreading that you're deploying." "What did you tell them?" "That they're about to see why their instructor's hands are famous." Sophia paused, considering the weight of those words. For years, her hands had been a source of mockery, then grudging respect, and finally a symbol of her program's philosophy. Now they would once again do what they were trained for, take lives to save lives. "If I don't come back," she began. "You will," Harrison interrupted firmly. "But when you do, this program won't be an experiment anymore. It'll be doctrine." 12 hours later, Sophia lay perfectly still in a ventilation shaft above a fortified apartment in Ankara, her body contorted in a space so confined that even breathing required conscious control. Below her, through the narrow slats of a vent, she could see 4 hostages huddled in a bathroom, the diplomat's wife and children, along with the intelligence asset they'd been sheltering. 3 armed guards patrolled the adjacent rooms, following an irregular pattern that suggested professional training. Based on the initial briefing, Sophia knew they were former Special Forces operators, now working for a private military contractor, with ties to regional extremist groups. The mission parameters were brutally simple: neutralize the threats and secure the hostages before the main assault team breached the building's perimeter. The complication was timing. The entire operation hinged on synchronized execution with zero margin for error. In her ear, the operation commander's voice was a measured whisper. Breach team in position. 2-minute warning. Sophia made a final mental calculation, visualizing the sequence of shots needed. The confined space meant she couldn't use her rifle. Instead, she had a specially modified suppressed handgun, smaller than standard issue, with a grip customized for her hands. 1 minute. She controlled her breathing, her heart rate slowing as she entered the familiar mental state of absolute focus. Time seemed to stretch as her awareness expanded, cataloging every detail. The guards' movements, the hostages' positions, the exact angles she would need. 30 seconds. With movements so subtle they were barely perceptible, Sophia unscrewed the vent cover, creating just enough space to establish her shooting position. 10 seconds. She identified her first target, the guard nearest the hostages, the most immediate threat. 5, 4, 3. In one fluid motion, Sophia pushed through the vent opening, her small frame allowing her to drop into position with minimal disturbance. Before her feet even touched the ground, she had fired twice. 2 precise shots that neutralized the closest guard before he could react. The second guard turned at the sound, but Sophia was already moving, using her size to stay below his line of fire as she crossed the distance between them. 3 more shots, each finding its mark with surgical precision. The third guard managed to raise his weapon, but Sophia had anticipated this. She slid beneath his aim, her small stature making her a difficult target, and fired upward at a precise angle that ensured the bullet's path avoided any potential ricochet toward the hostages. 7 seconds. 3 threats neutralized. Clear, she whispered into her comm. Hostages secure. Outside, the breach team hit their entry points with perfect synchronization, but they were securing an already controlled situation.
When they reached the apartment's interior, they found Sophia calmly administering first aid to the youngest hostage, a little girl who had scraped her knee in the confusion. The team leader took in the scene 3 neutralized threats, all with textbook shot placement, and 4 unharmed hostages. "Ghost hands," he said, using the call sign that had once been spoken with awe in Syria. "They said you retired." Sophia didn't look up from bandaging the child's knee. Some skills you never lose. When the extraction helicopter lifted off 20 minutes later, Sophia sat quietly, watching the Ankara skyline recede into the distance. The intelligence asset, a scientist whose research had implications for national security, studied her with unconcealed curiosity. "They told us no one could reach us," he said finally. "The access points were too small for special forces." Sophia glanced down at her hands, which were cleaning her weapon with practiced efficiency despite the helicopter's vibrations. "Standard special forces," she corrected. "We're developing new standards now." Back at the command center, the operation debriefing was unusually crowded. Senior officers who normally wouldn't attend a single operator extraction had found reasons to be present. The room hummed with a tension that Sophia recognized, the institutional resistance to change confronting irrefutable evidence that change was necessary. General Crawford conducted the debrief with clinical precision, walking through each phase of the operation with accompanying footage from Sophia's body camera. When he reached the moment of her entry through the ventilation system, he paused the footage. "I want to highlight something here," he said, addressing the room of senior officers. "This access point measured 18 inches in diameter. Our standard operating procedures would have classified this as a no-go for operator entry." He let that sink in before continuing. Captain Chen not only navigated this entry point, but maintained full tactical capability throughout. The result was a clean extraction with 0 civilian casualties. A colonel from traditional special operations leaned forward. "With respect, General, this seems like a one-off scenario, a statistical anomaly." "That's what I called Captain Chen when she first qualified as a sniper," Crawford replied evenly. "I was wrong then. We've been wrong for years." He advanced the footage, showing Sophia's movement through the apartment, her use of space, angles, and precision that turned her smaller stature into an advantage rather than a liability. "This isn't about lowering standards," Crawford continued. "It's about recognizing that our current standards measure the wrong things for many modern mission profiles." Captain Chen's non-traditional operators program isn't creating exceptions to the rule. It's rewriting the rules to better serve operational realities. The colonel remains skeptical. And when brute strength is required, when doors need breaching or casualties need extracting, then we deploy operators with those specific capabilities, Sophia interjected, speaking for the first time since the debrief began. The point isn't to replace traditional operators, but to expand our capabilities by deploying the right operator for each specific mission parameter. She stood and approached the display, highlighting specific moments from the operation. My entry method wasn't possible for a larger operator. My movement pattern utilized spaces that would be inaccessible to someone with a traditional build. My shooting stance leveraged my lower center of gravity. She turned to face the room directly. These weren't adaptations to overcome limitations. They were specific tactical advantages for this particular scenario. The room fell silent as her words sank in. It was a fundamental challenge to decades of military doctrine, the notion that bigger, stronger, and faster wasn't always better. That in a world of increasingly complex conflicts, diversity of tactical capabilities might be the most important strategic advantage. The data speaks for itself, Crawford concluded. The non-traditional operators program is being expanded effective immediately, with Captain Chen's training protocols implemented across all special operations branches. As the meeting disbanded, Sophia found herself surrounded by officers who had once dismissed her program as a political concession rather than a tactical necessity. Now they were asking questions, requesting demonstrations, seeking her expertise on adapting their own training regimens. She answered each question with the same patience she showed her trainees, but her mind was already elsewhere, focused on the implications of what had just happened. The Ankara operation wasn't just a successful mission. It was a watershed moment in special operations doctrine. Later that evening, she found herself back at the training facility, walking the gauntlet course alone in the fading light. Each obstacle, each shooting position, each tactical challenge had been designed based on her own experiences. The lessons learned through years of having to prove herself in a system designed for someone else's body. "Thought I'd find you here," came Major Harrison's voice from behind her. "Old habits," she replied, not turning around. "The trainees watched the debrief footage," he said, coming to stand beside her. "You should have seen their faces." Now she did look at him. "Footage from a classified operation?" Harrison's smile was unapologetic. Heavily redacted, of course. But they needed to see what they're training for. What's possible? Sophia nodded, understanding the motivation if not entirely approving of the method. "How's Corporal Reyes?" she asked, changing the subject to her star trainee. "Processing her first deployment orders. Special Activities Division requested her specifically for an operation in Malaysia. Something about narrow cave systems." A small smile touched Sophia's lips. "And the others?" "All placed. Every graduate from the first class has deployment orders. Turns out when word gets around that operators with non-traditional builds can access places others can't, they become very popular with mission planners." They walked in companionable silence for a while, following the course that had been born from Sophia's determination to prove that different didn't mean deficient. "You know," Harrison said finally, "when you first proposed this program, I supported it because I thought it was the right thing to do, giving opportunities to qualified candidates regardless of physical build. But I didn't fully understand what you were really building." "And what was that?" "The future." He gestured to the training ground around them. "Warfare is evolving. Urban environments, complex terrain, precision requirements, technological integration. These all favor specialized skills over standardized capabilities. You saw that before anyone else did." Sophia stopped at the final shooting position of the gauntlet, the place where trainees had to make a series of increasingly difficult shots to demonstrate mastery, not just of marksmanship, but of judgment. "I saw it because I had to," she said quietly. "When you don't fit the mold, you either break yourself trying to conform or you find another way forward. And now that other way is becoming the standard." Harrison handed her a folder he'd been carrying. "These just came through. New physical qualification guidelines for special operations candidates, based on your program's data." They're categorizing operators by mission capability profiles rather than standardized physical metrics. Sophia opened the folder and saw page after page of revised protocols, each bearing her program's influence. The military, an institution famously resistant to change, had not only accepted her approach but was now codifying it into doctrine. "Your hands aren't just changing the game, Captain," Harrison said. "They're changing the rules by which the game is played." The next morning, Sophia stood before a new class of recruits, twice the size of her first cohort. They represented an even broader spectrum of body types and physical characteristics, each selected not despite their differences, but because of the potential tactical advantages those differences might provide. "Welcome to the Non-Traditional Operators Training Program," she began, her voice carrying across the assembly area. "Look around you. What do you see?" The recruits glanced at each other uncertainly. "I'll tell you what I see," Sophia continued. "I see the future of special operations. Not because you're exceptions to the rule, but because you represent a new understanding of what makes an effective operator in modern combat environments." She held up her hands. The small, precise instruments that had once been objects of ridicule and were now symbols of a tactical revolution. These hands have taken lives and saved lives. They've been mocked and they've been feared. But most importantly, they've changed what's possible. She gestured to the training course behind her. "You're here because each of you has something unique to offer. Something that traditional metrics might have overlooked or undervalued." A young female recruit raised her hand. "Ma'am, they still call us misfits back at our units." Sophia nodded. "They called me worse. But here's what I learned. In a world where warfare is increasingly about specialization, being different isn't a liability, it's a tactical asset." She pointed to various trainees in turn. "Your smaller frame means you can access spaces others can't." One recruit, a wiry man with unusually small hands similar to Sophia's, looked skeptical. "But ma'am, when we deploy, won't traditional operators still look down on us?" 2 days ago, I conducted an extraction operation in Ankara," Sophia replied. "An 18-inch ventilation shaft was the only viable entry point. No traditional operator could have completed that mission." She let that sink in. "You won't earn respect by trying to be something you're not. You'll earn it by being exactly who you are, and demonstrating why that matters tactically." As the training day began, Sophia watched her new recruits tackle the initial assessments, each finding their own approach based on their unique physical attributes. Where once the military had sought uniformity, her program celebrated specialization. Where traditional training tried to overcome physical differences, her approach leveraged them. Later that afternoon, she received a visitor, Specialist Derek Powell, the trainee who had once mocked her hands so mercilessly. Now he wore the insignia of Delta Force, having completed his own journey through Special Operations selection. "Captain Chen," he said, standing at a respectful distance. "I heard you were back from Ankara." "Word travels fast," she observed. "In certain circles, your call sign still carries weight." He shifted uncomfortably. "I wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For what you taught us that day on the range, about judgment, about not underestimating people based on appearances." He gestured to the trainees working through their drills. "My unit was paired with one of your graduates last month. Tunisia operation. Close-quarter urban environment. She accessed spaces we couldn't, created angles we wouldn't have thought possible." Sophia nodded, unsurprised. "Corporal Reyes." "Yes, ma'am, she saved my life." Powell met her eyes directly. "If I hadn't learned the lesson you taught us about looking past physical appearances, I might not have trusted her lead in that moment." As Powell departed, Sophia turned back to observe her trainees. A profound sense of completion settling over her. The journey that had begun with mockery and doubt had culminated in something far more significant than personal vindication. It had changed military doctrine itself. That evening, as the sun set over the training grounds, Sophia Chen stood at the sniper platform of the gauntlet, her M24A3 rifle resting comfortably in her small hands. The weapon that had once been a source of mockery now represented a fundamental shift in how the military understood human capability. She chambered a single round and took aim at the farthest target, the one set at a distance most considered impossible. As she settled into her breathing pattern, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the young recruit mocked for her tiny hands to the captain who had rewritten special operations doctrine. From an outsider trying to prove she belonged to the architect of a new understanding of what belonging truly meant, the shot, when she took it, was perfect, as she had known it would be. Not because she had overcome her physical characteristics, but because she had embraced them fully, turning what others saw as limitations into her greatest strengths. In that moment, Captain Sophia Chen understood the true lesson of her journey. Sometimes the hands that others mock become the hands that reshape the world. Sometimes the differences that make you an outsider are precisely what make you invaluable. And sometimes the most revolutionary act isn't fighting the system from the outside, but transforming it from within. As night fell over the training facility, she collected her brass and secured her weapon with the same precise movements that had defined her career. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new trainees, new missions. But something fundamental had changed, not just in military doctrine, but in the possibilities it recognized. The hands they had mocked had indeed become their deadliest weapon, not just in combat, but in challenging the limitations of human potential itself. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.